Welcome back. Time for us to go behind the headlines. It's 14 after, and today we have to worry about this Department of Justice memo. And my friend Johnny Green at the Weed blog also had a little bit of skepticism. So many people are rejoicing about this memo, but it's important to remember this is just a memo of guidance, and the prosecutors all across the land still have plenty of leeway to go after marijuana that they determine needs to be prosecuted. And nowhere is this more important than just north of us in the state of Washington, because Washington medical marijuana dispensaries are still federal targets. The marijuana legalization movement danced a victory dance last night at the announcement by the U.S. Department of Justice of these 8 new priorities to guide the U.S. attorneys in the prosecution of state-regulated marijuana markets. Specifically, DOJ announced it would not be suing to enjoin the ballot initiatives passed by Washington and Colorado, that state-regulated markets abiding by the 8 priorities would be less likely to attract federal prosecution, and that well-run state programs, quote, may affirmatively address those priorities, end quote. Now, in Colorado, with its seed-to-sale, highly regulated program of both medical and recreational marijuana dispensaries are breathing a sigh of relief. But in the state of Washington, the responses from the U.S. attorneys, Jenny Durkin and Michael Ormsby, whose districts include the western side, Seattle and western Washington, and Spokane, the eastern side of Washington, respectively. These responses should send a shiver down the spines of medical marijuana distributors in Washington state. Here's some of the language from the memo that's relevant. Quote, "We will continue to enforce the Controlled Substances Act. We will continue our work against organized criminal organizations and their underground economy. The continued operation and proliferation of unregulated for-profit entities outside of the state's regulatory and licensing scheme is not tenable and violates both state and federal law. While our resources are limited, we will continue to enforce federal law in this arena." That's the U.S. attorneys for Washington, Jenny Durkin and Michael Ormsby, saying that the operation of unregulated for-profit entities is not tenable. Now, Washington state has no regulatory or licensing scheme for medical marijuana. Washington even lacks a state registry card system that's found in almost all the other medical marijuana states. The collection of dispensaries and co-ops and farmers markets that have proliferated in the Puget Sound area and out in the Palouse, well, they kind of operate on a wink-wink, nudge-nudge system. And this goes back to 2011, when the governor then, who was Governor Christine Gregoire, had a bill that came before her, Senate Bill 5073, that would have established a regulated medical marijuana dispensary system. She line item vetoed most of the portions that had to do with regulating a dispensary system. And her reasoning, her fear at the time, was that the involvement of the state officials trying to regulate dispensaries would then be subject to potential federal prosecution. She was afraid state workers would get busted by the feds. Ironically, that lack of state regulation now puts these businesses in greater danger than if Gregoire had signed the regulations in 2011. This frightful news for medical marijuana distributors follows previous concerns about the taxation scheme for Washington's recreational marijuana market, which will tax pot at 25% 3 times. At the cultivation level, at the wholesale level, and at the retail level. Plus, you got to add in the standard state sales tax of 6.5%. Plus, some municipalities and localities have their own sales taxes to add on top of that. But there is no taxation on the state's current medical marijuana market, although some dispensaries that are seeking legitimacy have voluntarily paid some taxes. The state marijuana consultant, Mark Kleiman, the one that we've called Washington's pot czar, has suggested that medical marijuana will have to be equally taxed in order for the recreational market to take hold, or else far cheaper medical pot will become a strong incentive for recreational users to game the system for a medical recommendation. Some state lawmakers in Washington paint an even bleaker picture. Representative Chris Hurst, a Democrat, speaking to Huffington Post, predicted last May that medical marijuana dispensaries will not survive once recreational pot shops open, anticipating that the federal government will crack down on the unlicensed, unregulated entities. He said, quote, all you have to do is make examples of 5 or 6 people and the entire industry collapses almost immediately. You have to have something to replace it, and that's what the recreational market is, end quote. Well, if the recreational market is the replacement for medical users, they can expect to be spending $12 or more per gram retail, according to estimates from the State Liquor Control Board, which controls the marijuana market. Current prices in Washington range from $5 to $10 per gram for those patients that are patronizing the medical marijuana dispensaries and farmers markets. Patients would also be limited to purchases of an ounce or less to comport with the recreational laws. Now, medical users would still retain the rights to possess 24 ounces of marijuana and to cultivate 15 plants or collectively cultivate 45 plants. So there will still be some incentive to get medical. And that will still exist for the recreational users, especially since Washingtonians, unlike Coloradoans, have no right to grow plants for their own personal use.